like the rides.
Rides that make small kids giggle and big ones scream.
That was the funnest thing of my whole life!
And to think he almost missed out, because this afternoon, Wonderland closed for good. Sold for more than $52 million, the fun park will be replaced with a business park.
This is the story of Wonderland Sydney. For Australians and particularly people from the Sydney area, this theme park is ingrained in their childhood alongside Handball, Cheese TV, Around the Twist, John Howard, Blinky Bill, Tarzos, and Healthy Harold, who in 2017 was unfunded by the Australian government. Rest in peace, old friend. But internationally, I doubt if many people know that Wonderland Sydney existed. A lot of theme park enthusiasts worldwide know about Movie World, non-Orca-based SeaWorld, and Dreamworld, but Wonderland? Most have never heard of it. Even scouring YouTube, you'll find a ton of videos from the park and news reports about Wonderland, but there's no videos really explaining the history of the park or what it was, why it failed, and where it went. So I'm hoping to fill that gap and do some educating in the process. And before we start, a huge shout out to WonderlandHistory.net and their multiple media channels. They have been a huge help in providing footage and history of the park, so go and give them some virtual kisses over the internet. Not sure if that's possible yet, but I say it is, so you have to go and do it. So, let's take everything back to the year 1985 in Australia. Melbourne is celebrating its 150th birthday, go Melbourne. Neighbours launches on Channel 7, and we've just abolished the death sentence. Go Australia? Around this time, the New South Wales Superannuation Board, James Hardie's Industries, Leighton Holdings, and King Entertainment Group all came together some years before to basically provide an alternative for Luna Park Sydney, which at this point had opened and closed multiple times. Luna Park Sydney has an extensive history in itself and will probably get its own video at some point. The theme park they were planning on building was based around Canada's Wonderland, one of King Entertainment's parks which actually still exists today, and on the 7th of December 1985, Australia's Wonderland in eastern Sydney would open to the public, with 3 separate themed areas: Gold Rush, Medieval Fair, and Hanna-Barbera Land, which all contained an extensive amount of rides. The park at opening was a smash hit and featured some world-class attractions, including the Bush Beast, which is easily the most famous ride in the park. This 975-meter-long wooden roller coaster was based on Canada Wonderland's Wild Beast and was the tallest in the Southern Hemisphere at opening. It also had a little brother called the Beastie, which was literally a mini version of the Bush Beast. An odd decision, but it worked. And I've been on that one. I'm fairly certain I didn't go on the big one, because I was like 7 or 10 when it closed. I was young. I was very young. Other rides that the park opened with were Bounty's Revenge, a large inverting pirate ship ride by Intamin, Dragon's Flight, a wave swinger designed by Zierra, the Funnel Web, an Early Spider by Early Aircraft Company, Ned Kelly's Getaway, a steep sled slide which finished in water. This one was small. Tasmanian Devil, an explorer-type ride from Danfab Engineering. Wizard's Fury, a bay and curve by Schwarzkopf, which was loud AF and came from Kings Island. It was loud AF because it was made in the 70s and was only transferred over in 1985 to Australia. HMS Endeavour, a Seas Panic-style ride which spun guests around and most likely made them very sick. And Little Monsters Flying School, which was an Alan Herschel Red Baron ride. As you can see, there were plenty of companies pitching into the Wonderland project, or their designs just being bought, but there was a significant amount of opening flat ride attractions. It also opened with the Snowy River Rampage ride, which was an equally as famous attraction for Australians. This was a almost kilometre-long river rapid ride designed by Intamin. And this ride snaked through many areas of the park, and guests could interact with numerous elements around the attraction to splash and soak the riders. It was awesome. You would see them come past and you would just spray them down to death with a hose. The park from opening could only go up. It constantly added new attractions, and with it being partially owned by King Entertainment, which also operated numerous other theme parks around the world, including King's Island, they could swap around rides like the Zodiac and Wizard's Fury, which actually came from said King's Island, and they continued to add more and more flat rides. In 1988, Australia's Wonderland was changed to Wonderland Sydney, and opened a water park known as The Beach. Now, Australia has many beaches, but we only have one in a theme park. Well, we did. That's to come. In 1992, along with King Entertainment being bought by Viacom and changing their name to Paramount Park, they added a Vekoma boomerang steel roller coaster called the Demon, which in itself has an extensive history. And in 1995, added Space Probe 7, which was a unique take on the intimate giant drop ride, with its passengers being ascended into an enclosed space with screens featuring a countdown. Most riders could tell you though that the drop was random, and the countdown was just there as a farce. The park was now the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, and people from around Australia and New South Wales were thrilled with its progress. It would feature fireworks every Saturday night, had numerous shows, and the park was massive for kids and adults to roam and experience Wonderland. But, as with all good things, there's a peak, and things just started going downhill. And the Space Probe 7 was the end of Wonderland's exciting history. In 1997, Wonderland was sold to the Sunway Group. Sunway owned a few resorts and theme parks around Malaysia, and this buyout should have been prosperous, bringing more attractions and a resort to the theme park, and no. History shows that Sunway barely cared about the park. The 10 years before Sunway, Wonderland had received so many exciting new and innovative attractions, but after Sunway, we got a cable car. In the 7 or 8 years that Sunway owned Wonderland Sydney, they added a cable car. And in 2002, they actually closed down a whole section of the park, stating that the park was just too big. The Beastie, which was one of the most iconic rides in the parks, especially for children, was just left dormant. They just closed it. No one could go to that part of the park. They didn't care. On the 16th of February, 2004, Sunway Group announced that by the middle of the year, Wonderland Sydney would be closing its gates for the last time. The park had been sold for $52 million, and on Anzac Day, April 25th, 2004, Wonderland Sydney closed its gates forever. So, what happened to Wonderland Sydney? How would they respect the land that contains so many memories, so much fun and excitement, and why did the park close in the first place? Perhaps using the land they could make a nature reserve, or perhaps the land was sold for another theme park to come along, maybe like another Movie World or a Wet n Wild. Well, the only respectable way to honour such a great theme park was to sell everything and build an industrial park on the land. That's exactly what they did. And so thus begins Wonderland Sydney being sold and torn apart, and in June, Dragon's Flight, the merry-go-round and baby bumpers were put into shipping containers and sent to Sunway Lagoon in Malaysia. The Bush Beast had a heritage order submitted on it to the Blacktown Council as sort of like a last-minute please do not destroy it sort of thing, and the park actually became a training environment for soldiers in the reserve forces. That's actually kinda cool. Imagine being able to like go around and train on all of the defunct rides. That would be actually pretty cool. Surprisingly, many of the rides were seen operating for months following the park's closure. My assumption this is to prevent stationary-based problems with mechanisms on the attractions, as they were most likely being sold off. However, the Snowy River Rampage ride was reported to be operating and it was planned on being demolished, so it could have honestly just been crews messing around. There are videos of this online, so it could make sense. So in July and August 2004, the Space Probe, Demon, and Rapid rides were still seen operating. The geysers on the River Rapid Rampage ride were periodically being set off for unknown reasons. Also, at this point, one of the trains on the Bush Beast was just sitting on top of the hill. just sitting there, enjoying the view. Around September and October, the Bush Beast and Beastie trains were moved around constantly, ready to be sold for another wooden roller coaster, and there is actually a listing on userides.com from 2006 where they said that it was recently taken off a ride and they were trying to sell the carriages. They had been sitting in a paddock for 2 years. Who would buy a ride train that had been sitting in a paddock for 2 years? Honestly, if I had the money at this point, I would have bought those, but that's beside the point. In November, basically everything that could be sold was. Bounty's Revenge and the Great Balloon Race, Galleon's Graveyard, Little Monsters Flying School. That picture actually brings back memories of me riding that ride. That's really cool. They were all being removed to go to their new owners. And in December, the park's electricity was turned off in the main high voltage switch room, which meant that demolition was ready to go underway. The Demon was slowly deconstructed over December and was taken off site by the end of the month. The main Wonderland Sydney front gate sign was taken down and sold to a junkyard, which is actually probably the best thing that could happen to it because it still exists today in said junkyard. Now, as with all things involving deconstruction and lots of money, between December 2004 and mid-2005, there was a legal complication, which meant that basically everything came to a halt. No demolition, no entering the site, nothing in there was allowed to be touched, which is odd, as in March of 2005, a man had fallen from the space probe. Thankfully, a metal platform inside the tower had broken his fall, and he received immediate medical attention from ambulances and was taken to hospital to only be released later that day. I'd love to talk to this guy. If you're out there, I want to know what happened and why you fell from the space probe. Now, the legal complications were basically along the lines of a Canadian company came along to deconstruct the Demon, but did not have the proper regulations or licenses to do this, so they hired someone at the last minute, and he tore it all apart, and then the Canadian company was like, hey, we're not gonna pay you. So he was like, well, I'm gonna sue your asses. That's basically a small rundown of what happened. In August 2005, demolition was allowed to continue in the Gold Rush area of the park. But Zodiac and Space Probe, two rides which were ready to be deconstructed and sold, were not allowed to be touched. Just put up fences around it, no touchy. Later in the month, they were given the go-ahead to level the park completely in a non-recoverable demolition of Wonderland Sydney. And this was requested as quickly as possible, except for the Space Probe and Zodiac, which was still waiting to be deconstructed and sent away. On Saturday morning of August 27th, 2005, they rather morbidly connected one of these steel cables from the Skyrider, which ironically was one of the only rides that Sunway put into the park. There's some grim metaphor in there. They connected it to two bulldozers and attempted to knock the Bush Beast down. The Bush Beast, being a proper Australian, didn't go down without a fight. The cable actually snapped several times before they eventually just gave up and ploughed right through the structure, with it all falling down behind them. And then they dumped it into the Snowy River Rapids ride. And this was officially the end of Wonderland Sydney. So, why did Wonderland close? Rather hilariously, Sunway Group blamed it on everything they could. The September 11 attacks, the 2002 Bali bombings, the collapse of HIH insurance, the SARS virus, the bird flu virus, consistent losses on the Asian financial crisis, the collapse of Ansett Australia, the Iraq War, and the 2003 bushfires. The Sydney Morning Herald put it the best in saying that Sunway Group blames Wonderland's demise on everything except poor management. My honest assumption is that they didn't care about Wonderland Sydney. They knew that by selling the park, they could easily fund their other Sunway resorts and make instant profits compared to, you know, actually running the park and maintaining it with new attractions and features. The announcement of the park's closure came almost days after ING and Paclib came together to fund the $52 million buyout of Wonderland, to buy the park and its land, and basically demolish it, sell it, get rid of all of it. And I'm fairly certain Sunway just took the opportunity to go, peace, we out. So, that is Wonderland Sydney. It's interesting to think what might have happened if it never closed, and what it would look like today. As somebody who holds theme parks in such high regard, it would be amazing to have a local park like Wonderland. I believe that my passion of theme parks can be traced back to my parents taking me here when I was younger, and whilst at the time I didn't know, it would have a strong effect on how I would see theme parks in the future. So thank you, Wonderland Sydney, for all of your fun times and good laughs and goofs and gaffs. We'll always remember Wonderland Sydney. Thank you for watching. This is a rather different video than what I would normally do, and I would love the feedback. I've got plans to talk about the history of Luna Park in Australia and also our other Australian theme parks. I may eventually branch out to talk about the history of various rides, attractions and parks internationally. I'd especially like to talk about Arrow, who made the first steel roller coaster and now are bankrupt and no longer exists. If this interests you, please let me know. Anyway guys, thank you for watching. I'm CaptainLazerGuns. Continue being awesome.